Minji Park sat at her small desk in the community center, staring at the cream-colored envelope in her hands. The paper felt thick and expensive, nothing like the usual mail she received at work. She turned it over carefully and saw the gold seal on the back, the Hope Foundation Annual Charity Gala. It read in elegant letters. "You have to go," said her coworker Subin, leaning over her shoulder to look at the invitation. "This is a huge event. All the rich people in the city attend. It's at the Grand Plaza Hotel." Minji shook her head slowly. "I don't think so. This isn't for someone like me. They probably sent it by mistake." "No mistake," Subin insisted, tapping the envelope. "It says right there, one representative from our community center. The director said you should go because you work so hard with the children's programs. You deserve a nice evening out." Minji looked down at her plain cotton shirt and simple black pants. She thought about her tiny apartment with its second-hand furniture. She thought about taking the subway to work every morning, while wealthy people drove past in expensive cars. A charity gala at the Grand Plaza Hotel seemed like a different world, a world she didn't belong to. "I don't have anything to wear," she said quietly. Subin smiled. "My sister has a dress that would look beautiful on you. She wore it to a wedding last year. I'll bring it tomorrow." "Please, Minji. You never do anything for yourself. Just go and enjoy one fancy evening." That night, Minji lay in bed thinking about the invitation. She had never been to anything like a charity gala before. She imagined crystal chandeliers and tables covered in white cloth. She pictured women in expensive jewelry and men in tailored suits. The thought made her nervous, but a small part of her was curious too. The next day, Subin brought the dress as promised. It was a simple dark blue dress, elegant but not flashy. When Minji tried it on in the community center bathroom, she was surprised at how well it fit. The dress was modest, reaching below her knees with sleeves that covered her shoulders. It was perfect for someone who didn't want to stand out. "You look beautiful," Subin said when Minji emerged from the bathroom. "You're going to have a wonderful time." The evening of the gala arrived too quickly. Minji took extra care getting ready, styling her hair in a simple bun and applying a little makeup. She looked at herself in the mirror and took a deep breath. The woman looking back at her seemed almost like a stranger, dressed up and nervous. She took the subway to the Grand Plaza Hotel, clutching a small, borrowed purse. As she walked the last few blocks, she saw other people heading to the hotel. The women wore glittering dresses and carried designer handbags. The men wore expensive watches that caught the streetlights. Minji felt her confidence shrinking with every step. At the hotel entrance, a red carpet stretched from the sidewalk to the golden doors. Photographers stood on both sides, their cameras flashing as guests arrived. Minji walked quickly past them, hoping no one would notice her. She reached the entrance where two security guards stood checking invitations. "Invitation, please," one guard said, barely looking at her. Minji handed over her invitation with shaking hands. The guard examined it carefully, then looked at her with raised eyebrows. He turned to his partner and whispered something. Minji felt her face grow hot. "This is for a guest," the first guard said slowly, as if explaining something to a child. "Are you sure you're not looking for the staff entrance? It's around the back." "I'm a guest," Minji said softly, "from the downtown community center." The guard looked at the invitation again, then at her simple dress and plain shoes. He seemed doubtful but finally nodded and let her pass. Minji hurried inside, her heart pounding. The ballroom took her breath away. Enormous crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting rainbow lights across the room. Round tables covered in white silk filled the space, each decorated with tall flower arrangements. A stage stood at the front with a podium and a large screen. Everything sparkled and shined. Minji found a woman with a clipboard who was directing guests to their tables. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "I'm Minji Park from the downtown community center." The woman ran her finger down a long list. "Ah yes, table 42. That's in the back corner on the left side." She pointed toward the far end of the ballroom without really looking at Minji. Minji walked through the crowd, weaving between groups of people talking and laughing. She passed tables near the stage where wealthy-looking guests were already seated, drinking champagne and chatting comfortably. The women at those tables wore dresses that probably cost more than Minji earned in several months. Their jewelry caught the light as they moved, diamonds and pearls and gold. Table 42 was exactly where the woman had said, tucked in the far corner of the ballroom. The other guests at her table were already there. Minji recognized them as people like herself, representatives from small non-profits and community organizations. They smiled at her warmly as she sat down. "First time at one of these?" asked an elderly man across from her. He wore a suit that looked clean but old, the cuffs slightly worn. "Yes," Minji admitted. "I feel a bit out of place." "Don't we all?" the man said kindly. "I'm Jae-won. I run a food bank on the east side. We get invited to these things, but they always put us in the cheap seats." He gestured around their corner location with a gentle smile. Minji relaxed slightly. At least she wasn't alone in feeling like she didn't belong. She looked around the ballroom, taking in the beautiful decorations. Despite her nervousness, she felt glad she had come. The Hope Foundation did good work, helping children who needed support. That was worth celebrating, even if she felt uncomfortable in such a fancy setting. She took out her phone and snapped a few photos of the chandeliers and flowers. She wanted to show Subin and her other co-workers what the gala looked like. They would never believe how grand everything was. As she was taking a photo of the stage, she heard loud laughter from a nearby table. A group of well-dressed women sat there, much closer to the stage than Minji's table. One of them, a woman with perfectly styled hair and a dress that shimmered like liquid silver, was looking in Minji's direction. "Look at that," the woman said to her friends, her voice carrying across the space between tables. "Someone taking pictures like they've never seen a nice venue before." The other women at the table turned to look. They whispered to each other and giggled. Minji quickly put her phone away, her face burning with embarrassment. She stared down at the empty plate in front of her, wishing she could disappear. The woman in the silver dress leaned back in her chair, still watching Minji. "I wonder if everyone really belongs at these events," she said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Standards used to mean something. Minji kept her eyes down, pretending she hadn't heard. But her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. She had been at the gala for less than 15 minutes, and already she felt the weight of not belonging pressing down on her shoulders. The evening had just begun, and Minji wondered if coming had been a terrible mistake. Waiters in crisp white jackets began serving the first course. Minji watched as they placed small plates of food in front of each guest. At her table, the other community workers chatted quietly among themselves, sharing stories about their organizations and the people they helped. At the table where the woman in the silver dress sat, the atmosphere was completely different. That group spoke loudly, their laughter ringing across the ballroom. They seemed to know everyone important, waving at people at other tables and calling out greetings. Minji noticed that other guests treated them with respect, stopping by their table to chat. "That's Yoon-hee Choi," Jae-won said quietly, noticing where Minji was looking. "She's on the board of several charities. Her family owns a big real estate company. She always sits at the premium tables." Minji nodded, understanding. These were the people who truly belonged here. People with money and power and connections. She was just someone who worked at a community center, sitting at a back table because her organization received a courtesy invitation. The dinner continued with more courses. Minji tried to eat carefully, aware of every movement she made. She didn't want to use the wrong fork or make any mistakes that would draw more attention to herself. The food was delicious, unlike anything she normally ate. Each dish was beautifully arranged on expensive china. When the waiter brought bread to the table, Minji reached for a roll at the same time as another person. In the slight confusion, she knocked over her water glass. It didn't break, but water spilled across the white tablecloth. "Oh no," Minji gasped, grabbing her napkin to try to soak up the water. A waiter appeared immediately, moving with practiced efficiency. "It's no problem at all, ma'am," he said kindly, replacing the tablecloth section quickly with a clean one. But the damage was done. The small accident had drawn attention from nearby tables. Minji felt eyes on her, watching the clumsy woman who couldn't even manage dinner without making a mess. From Yoon-hee's table, the voice came again, loud and clear. "This is exactly what I mean about maintaining standards. Some people simply aren't used to fine dining. It's awkward for everyone." The women at her table murmured in agreement. One of them, wearing a diamond necklace that sparkled in the chandelier light, added, "I question whether everyone should really be invited to events like this. It's supposed to be for serious donors and supporters. Minji felt her chest tighten. She wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor and never come back. The other people at her table gave her sympathetic looks. They had all faced similar judgment at these types of events. Being poor or ordinary was treated like a character flaw in rooms like this. "Excuse me?" Minji whispered to her table mates. "I need to use the restroom." She stood carefully and walked toward the exit, keeping her head down. The bathrooms were down a long hallway decorated with expensive artwork and fresh flowers. Minji pushed open the door and checked that all the stalls were empty before letting out a shaky breath. She stood at the sink, looking at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were damp with tears she refused to let fall. She had known this would be difficult, but she hadn't expected to feel so small, so unwelcome. These people looked at her and saw someone worthless, someone who didn't deserve to be in the same room with them. Minji splashed cool water on her face and took several deep breaths. She would not let them see her cry. She would not give them that satisfaction. She had done nothing wrong. She had received an invitation just like everyone else. She had as much right to be here as anyone. After a few minutes, she dried her face and prepared to return to the ballroom. As she opened the bathroom door, she heard voices in the hallway. She recognized Yoonhee's sharp laugh immediately. "Did you see her taking pictures earlier?" Yoonhee was saying to two other women. "Like a tourist at a museum. I bet she's never been anywhere nice in her entire life." "Where did she even come from?" one of the other women asked. "Some community center downtown," Yoonhee replied with disgust in her voice. "They invite these charity cases every year to look inclusive. It's supposed to show that we care about regular people or something. But honestly, it just makes everyone uncomfortable." The third woman laughed. "That poor girl in the cheap dress. I wonder if she borrowed it from someone. You can tell it's not hers. Nothing fits her right." Minji stood frozen behind the bathroom door, listening to them tear her apart. They didn't even know her. They had never spoken to her. But they felt completely comfortable judging everything about her, from her clothes to her worth as a person. "Should we check if she's actually supposed to be here?" one of them suggested. Maybe she snuck in somehow. Security seemed uncertain when she arrived. "Oh, that's brilliant," Yoonhee said. "Let's go ask the coordinator. If nothing else, it will be entertaining." The women walked away, their high heels clicking on the marble floor. Minji waited until the sound faded before stepping out of the bathroom. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear anymore. She was angry. These cruel, small-minded people thought they were better than her because they had money. They measured a person's value by the price of their dress and the size of their bank account. Minji walked back to the ballroom with her head held high. She would not run away. She would not let them win. If they wanted to make a scene, she would face it with dignity. As she approached her table, she saw Yoonhee and her two friends talking to the event coordinator near the entrance. The coordinator held a tablet and was checking something on the screen. Yoonhee pointed toward Minji as she walked past. "Excuse me," Yoonhee called out, her voice loud enough to turn heads at nearby tables. "Miss, could you come here for a moment?" Minji stopped and turned around. Half the ballroom seemed to be watching now, curious about the commotion. She walked slowly toward the group, her heart pounding but her face calm. "Yes?" Minji said quietly. Yoonhee smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "We were just checking the guest list with the coordinator here." "Your invitation? It was from the downtown community center, correct?" "That's correct," Minji replied. "And you work there?" Yoonhee continued as if she were a lawyer questioning a witness. "Yes, I'm a bookkeeper there." The coordinator looked uncomfortable, checking her tablet nervously. "Ms. Park's invitation is completely valid," she said to Yoonhee. "Each community organization receives one invitation to send a representative." "Oh, I'm not questioning the invitation itself," Yoonhee said smoothly. "I just wanted to understand the situation. We need to know who everyone is for security purposes. You understand?" People at nearby tables were openly staring now. Some whispered to each other. Minji felt like she was on trial, like she had done something wrong simply by existing in this space. "Is there anything else?" Minji asked, keeping her voice steady. Yoonhee looked at her from head to toe, that cold smile still on her face. "No, that's all. Thank you for clarifying. Enjoy your evening." She turned back to her friends, and Minji heard her say in a stage whisper, "Well, at least we confirmed she's legitimate, though clearly only here because of some outreach program." The two friends laughed as they walked back to their table. Other guests returned to their conversations, but Minji felt their eyes still on her as she returned to her seat. The elderly man, Jaewon, gave her a sympathetic look. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that," he said kindly. "It's fine," Minji said, though it wasn't fine at all. She felt humiliated, reduced to entertainment for people who had nothing better to do than mock someone they considered beneath them. She sat down and stared at her plate, no longer hungry. The beautiful ballroom suddenly felt cold and hostile. Every laugh from Yoonhee's table felt like it was directed at her. Every glance from other guests felt like judgment, but Minji refused to leave. She had already decided that. She would sit through this entire event with her dignity intact. They could mock her clothes and question her presence, but they could not make her run away like a frightened child. At the front of the ballroom, someone began testing the microphone on stage. The program was about to begin. Minji took a sip of water and composed herself. Whatever happened next, she would face it with strength. These people did not know who she was, and that was fine. She knew who she was, and that was enough. The lights in the ballroom dimmed slightly, and a spotlight illuminated the stage. The conversations around the room quieted as guests turned their attention forward. A distinguished-looking man in his 50s walked to the podium, his suit perfectly tailored and his presence commanding. "Good evening, everyone," he said, his voice warm and professional. "I'm Taesung Kim, director of the Hope Foundation. Thank you all for joining us tonight." Applause filled the ballroom. Minji clapped along with everyone else, grateful that the attention was finally off her and onto the actual purpose of the evening. "We've gathered here tonight," Taesung continued, "to celebrate an incredible year for our foundation. But more importantly, to celebrate the thousands of children whose lives have been changed through your generosity and support." The large screen behind him came to life with images of smiling children. Some were in classrooms, bent over books and computers. Others were in medical clinics, receiving care from doctors and nurses. Each photo showed hope and possibility. "This year we've built 12 new schools in underserved communities," Taesung said, as images of modern school buildings appeared on the screen. "We've established 8 medical clinics providing free health care to children and families who couldn't otherwise afford it. We've awarded over 2,000 scholarships to students pursuing higher education." The numbers appeared on the screen, each one representing lives touched and futures changed. Minji watched with genuine interest. This was work that mattered, work that made a real difference. This was why she had agreed to come tonight, despite knowing she would feel out of place. "Our programs reached over 50,000 children this year," Taesung said, his voice filling with emotion. 50,000 young people who now have opportunities they didn't have before, and the total cost of these programs was just over $50 million. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. It was an enormous amount of money, proof of the scale of the foundation's work. This expansion, Taesung continued, was only possible because of one person, someone who has supported our foundation quietly for 5 years, an anonymous donor who believed in our mission long before it was popular to do so. Around the ballroom, guests sat up straighter, their interest clearly piqued. Minji noticed Yoonhee and her friends leaning forward, whispering excitedly to each other. Many of the wealthy guests began looking around the room, as if trying to guess who the mysterious donor might be. "This donor has given more to our foundation than anyone else in our history," Taesung said. "Year after year they have supported our work without asking for recognition, without wanting their name on buildings or programs. They simply wanted to help children." The screen showed more images of the foundation's work. A new library filled with books, a science lab with modern equipment, a sports facility where children played and laughed. Each image represented the anonymous donor's generosity. At Yoonhee's table, the women were buzzing with speculation. One pointed to a table near the front where a famous business executive sat. Another suggested it might be the elderly woman who owned a chain of department stores. Everyone seemed to assume the donor must be someone they already knew, someone from their own social circle. Yoonhee herself looked particularly pleased, smoothing her silver dress and checking her reflection in her compact mirror. Earlier in the evening, during the cocktail hour, she had made a big show of presenting a check to the foundation. $50,000, she had announced loudly, making sure everyone nearby heard. People had applauded and congratulated her, treating her like a generous benefactor. "Recently," Taesung said, drawing everyone's attention back to the stage, "this donor made an additional contribution that stunned our entire board. They increased their support significantly, allowing us to expand our programs even further. Their total contribution to our foundation now exceeds $80 million. The ballroom erupted in shocked whispers. $80 million was an extraordinary amount. It was more than most people could imagine, let alone donate to charity. Even the wealthy guests in the room seemed impressed. That kind of money represented serious commitment, not just token generosity. For 5 years, Taesung continued, this donor insisted on remaining anonymous. They refused every attempt we made to recognize their generosity. They didn't want awards or public acknowledgement. They didn't want their name associated with the foundation in any way. He paused, looking around the ballroom with a slight smile. Our board spent months trying to convince this person to accept public recognition. Not for their sake, but because we believed their generosity could inspire others. We wanted people to see what's possible when someone gives not for recognition, but purely to help others. The spotlight began to move slowly across the ballroom, creating a sense of anticipation. Guests at the premium tables sat up even straighter, adjusting their clothes and preparing for the moment when the light would land on them. Tonight, Taesung said, this remarkable person has finally agreed to be recognized. They're here with us this evening, and I want to take this opportunity to thank them publicly for everything they've done for our children. The spotlight continued its slow journey across the room. It passed over the table where the business executive sat. He looked disappointed when it moved on. It swept past the department store owner, who had already half risen from her seat in anticipation. Minji watched the spotlight move, feeling glad that the focus was on celebrating genuine charity rather than social politics. Whoever this anonymous donor was, they had the right idea. Giving should be about helping people, not about gaining status or attention. At Yoon-hee's table, the women sat in perfect posture, their faces arranged in modest but pleased expressions. They clearly expected the spotlight to land on one of them, or at least on someone at their table. This was the kind of recognition they lived for, the moment when everyone would see how important and generous they were. Ladies and gentlemen, Taesung said, his voice warm with genuine appreciation, please join me in thanking our foundation's greatest supporter and main sponsor, the person whose contributions have transformed countless young lives and whose generosity has made all of our programs possible. The spotlight moved past Yoon-hee's table. For a moment, confusion crossed her face. Where was it going? The only tables left were the cheap seats in the back, where the small non-profit representatives sat. Ms. Park Min-ji, Taesung announced clearly. The spotlight stopped on Min-ji's corner table, illuminating her in a circle of bright light. For a moment, the entire ballroom was completely silent. Every head turned toward the back corner. Every eye focused on the woman in the simple blue dress who had been mocked and questioned all evening. Min-ji sat frozen, her water glass halfway to her lips. The light was blinding, and she could feel hundreds of eyes on her. This couldn't be happening. There had to be some mistake. But Taesung continued speaking, his voice clear and certain. Ms. Park has donated over $80 million to the Hope Foundation over the past 5 years. She has funded the majority of our programs, touching the lives of thousands of children. And she has done all of this while insisting that her contributions remain anonymous. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. At Yoon-hee's table, every face had gone pale with shock. The woman in the silver dress sat with her mouth slightly open, unable to process what she was hearing. Her friends looked equally stunned, their perfectly made-up faces frozen in expressions of disbelief. Around the ballroom, wealthy guests who had ignored Min-ji all evening now stared at her in confusion and surprise. The security guards who had questioned her at the door exchanged uncomfortable glances. The event coordinator, who had been forced to verify her invitation, looked mortified. Min-ji slowly set down her water glass, her hands steady despite the shock. The spotlight remained on her, waiting. At the podium, Taesung smiled encouragingly and gestured for her to come forward. Ms. Park specifically requested that her donations remain private, Taesung said to the silent crowd. She attended tonight only after much persuasion from our board. She never wanted recognition or attention. She simply wanted her money to help children who needed it, the same way she was once helped. At her table, Jaewon stared at Min-ji with wide eyes. The other community workers looked equally shocked. The quiet bookkeeper they had shared dinner with was the mysterious donor everyone had been speculating about. The woman in the borrowed dress had given more money than anyone else in the room. Please, Taesung said warmly. Ms. Park, would you join me on stage? Min-ji took a deep breath. She had not wanted this moment. had argued against it when Tae-sung first asked for permission to recognize her publicly. But she had finally agreed because he convinced her that her story might inspire others to give, regardless of the amount. She stood slowly, smoothing her simple dress. The spotlight followed her as she walked through the silent ballroom. She passed table after table of people who had looked through her all evening, people who had assumed she was nobody worth noticing. She passed Yoonhee's table without looking at them, though she could feel their shocked stares burning into her back. The walk to the stage felt endless, every step echoing in the silent ballroom. When she reached the stage stairs, Tae-sung came down to escort her up, treating her with a respect and warmth that no one else had shown all evening. As Min-ji reached the podium, the ballroom finally found its voice. Applause began, tentative at first, then growing louder. But it was different from the applause earlier. This wasn't the polite clapping for someone's expected generosity. This was the sound of shock, of assumptions being shattered, of people trying to understand how they had gotten everything so wrong. Min-ji stood at the podium, the bright spotlight making it hard to see the faces in the crowd. She could feel the weight of their stares, the shock and confusion radiating from every table. Tae-sung stood beside her, holding a beautiful crystal award engraved with her name. "Thank you," he said warmly, presenting the award to her. The crystal was heavy in her hands, catching the light and sending rainbow patterns across the stage. "Would you like to say a few words?" Min-ji looked out at the sea of faces. She saw Yoonhee and her friends sitting in stunned silence at their premium table. She saw the security guards standing near the entrance, looking uncomfortable. She saw the wealthy guests who had ignored her all evening now watching her with new eyes, trying to understand who she really was. She could have said so many things. She could have mentioned how she was treated at the door, questioned like she might be a thief trying to sneak into an event she didn't belong at. She could have talked about the cruel comments, the mocking laughter, the way people looked at her like she was worthless because her dress was simple and her shoes weren't designer brands. But Min-ji had never been the type of person to seek revenge or embarrass others, even when they deserved it. She took a breath and leaned toward the microphone. "Thank you, Mr. Kim," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I appreciate this recognition, though I never wanted it." She paused, gathering her thoughts. The ballroom remained silent, everyone hanging on her words. 10 years ago, I was a single mother struggling to survive. I worked 2 jobs and could barely afford food and rent. When my daughter got sick, I didn't know how I would pay for her medical care. Min-ji's voice was steady, but the memory still carried weight. A charity program very similar to the Hope Foundation provided scholarships for my daughter's education and helped with her medical expenses. They saved us. A few people in the audience nodded, beginning to understand, but most still looked confused, unable to connect this story to the $80 million. That help changed everything. Min-ji continued. My daughter got the treatment she needed. She got the education that opened doors for her future. I kept working hard and eventually I started a small business. That business succeeded beyond anything I could have imagined. 5 years ago, I sold it. She looked down at the crystal award in her hands. I could have bought a mansion and expensive cars. I could have filled my life with luxury items. But I remembered what it felt like to be desperate, to watch my child suffer because I couldn't afford to help her. I remembered the charity that saved us. And I decided that the best use of my money was to help other families the way we were once helped. The ballroom was so quiet that Min-ji could hear her own heartbeat. She continued, "The Hope Foundation is one of several organizations I support. I chose to give anonymously because giving should be about the people you help, not about making yourself look good. I don't need awards or recognition. I just want children to have the opportunities they deserve." Tae-sung stepped forward, his eyes damp with emotion. Ms. Park continues to work her job at the community center, where she earns a modest salary. She lives in a small apartment and takes the subway to work every day. She gives away her wealth because she believes helping others is more important than personal luxury. The impact of his words was visible across the ballroom. Faces that had shown shock now showed shame. Yoonhee looked down at her table, her silver dress suddenly seeming too bright, too flashy. Her friends couldn't meet each other's eyes. "Thank you all for supporting the Hope Foundation," Min-ji said simply. "Every donation, large or small, makes a difference. Children are worth our investment. They are our future." She nodded to Tae-sung. "Thank you for letting me be part of this work." The applause that followed was thunderous. People rose from their seats, giving Min-ji a standing ovation. But it felt hollow to her. These same people had looked through her an hour ago. They applauded now because they knew she had money, not because anything about her had actually changed. Minji left the stage as quickly as she could, carrying the crystal award. As she walked back toward her table, people reached out to touch her arm or try to catch her attention. Suddenly, everyone wanted to talk to her, to connect with her. She kept walking, her face calm and pleasant, but offering no encouragement. When she reached her table, she sank into her chair with relief. Jaewon and the other community workers looked at her with a mixture of awe and confusion. "I can't believe it," Jaewon whispered. "All this time, we've been sitting with the foundation's biggest donor." "Please," Minji said quietly. "I'm just Minji. The same person I was 10 minutes ago. The money doesn't change who I am." But everything had changed, at least in how others saw her. The event coordinator rushed over to their table, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Ms. Park, I'm so sorry about earlier. The incident with Mrs. Choi questioning your invitation. It was completely inappropriate. Please let me move you to a better table. We have space at the VIP section near the stage." Minji shook her head. "Thank you, but I'm comfortable here with my friends." "But surely you'd prefer— I'm fine where I am," Minji said firmly but politely. The coordinator nodded and backed away, looking relieved to escape. At Yoonhee's table, the atmosphere was very different from the confident laughter of earlier. The women sat in uncomfortable silence, picking at their desserts without eating. One of Yoonhee's friends finally excused herself, mumbling something about needing fresh air. She couldn't face the evening anymore, couldn't sit there knowing what she had said about Minji just an hour before. Another friend stared at her plate, her face pale. She was replaying every cruel comment in her mind, every mocking laugh, every judgmental look. They had treated Minji like garbage, like someone so far beneath them that she didn't deserve basic respect. And all along she had been the most generous person in the room. Yoonhee herself sat frozen, her mind racing. She had donated $50,000 tonight and made sure everyone knew about it. She had stood on that same stage during the cocktail hour, accepting applause and congratulations, basking in the attention. $50,000 that she could easily afford. That wouldn't change her lifestyle at all. Minji had given $80 million over 5 years and told no one. She lived in a small apartment and worked a regular job and took the subway. She had more money than Yoonhee could imagine, but she chose to live simply so she could give more to others. The program continued with more speeches and presentations, but Yoonhee barely heard any of it. She kept thinking about Minji taking photos of the chandeliers, about calling her a charity case, about questioning her invitation in front of half the ballroom. The humiliation burned through her, hot and painful. Throughout the rest of the evening, a steady stream of people approached Minji's table. Wealthy business owners suddenly wanted to introduce themselves. Society women who had ignored her now smiled and complimented her dress. Men in expensive suits handed her business cards asking about her investment strategies and business portfolio. "We should have lunch," one woman gushed, as if they were old friends. "I'd love to hear about your approach to philanthropy." "Perhaps we could discuss partnership opportunities," a businessman suggested, his eyes calculating as he assessed her worth. Minji was polite to everyone but distant. She answered their questions briefly and didn't encourage further conversation. She could see through their sudden interest. They didn't care about her as a person. They cared about her money and connections, about what she could do for them. The genuine people at her table, the community workers who had welcomed her when she sat down, were different. They asked her about her story, really listening to her answers. They shared their own experiences with their organizations. These were people who understood that worth wasn't measured by bank accounts. Tae-sung came by the table personally, pulling up a chair to sit with them. "I hope the recognition wasn't too uncomfortable," he said to Minji with concern. "I know you didn't want this." "It's fine," Minji assured him. "If it helps the foundation raise more money for the children, then it was worth it." "You've already inspired several new donations tonight," Tae-sung said with a smile. "People are pledging money at the registration table. Your generosity is contagious." Minji smiled slightly at that. Maybe some good would come from this after all. If her public recognition encouraged others to give, if more children received help because of tonight, then she could accept the discomfort. But she couldn't help noticing the difference between the people pledging donations now and the way they had treated her earlier. They weren't giving because they suddenly cared more about children. They were giving because they had been shown up by someone they considered beneath them. They were giving to save face, to prove they were generous too. Real charity, Minji thought, shouldn't need an audience. It shouldn't need competition or recognition. It should come from a genuine desire to help others, not from a desire to look good in front of your peers. As the evening wore on, Minji found herself glancing toward Yoonhee's table. The woman who had been so cruel earlier sat quietly now, barely participating in her friends' conversations. Their eyes met once across the ballroom, and Yoonhee quickly looked away, her face flushing with shame. Minji felt no satisfaction in that moment. She had never wanted to humiliate anyone or prove she was better. She had simply wanted to help children quietly and live her life in peace. This whole evening, with its drama and revelations, was exactly what she had tried to avoid for 5 years. But perhaps Taesung was right. Perhaps her story would inspire others to give with genuine hearts rather than for show. Perhaps some people would learn that worth has nothing to do with appearances and everything to do with character. At least, she hoped so. The program was winding down, and guests began to relax and mingle again. Some headed to the bar for more drinks. Others formed small groups, talking and laughing. But the energy in the ballroom had completely shifted from earlier in the evening. Minji remained at her table, talking quietly with Jaewon about his food bank. He was telling her about the challenges of feeding families in the winter months when donations typically dropped. She listened attentively, genuinely interested in his work. "We serve about 300 families a week," Jaewon explained. "But in December and January, that number can double. People struggling to pay heating bills can't afford food. We do our best, but our budget is so limited." Minji made a mental note. Her foundation work wasn't limited to the Hope Foundation. She supported many small organizations like Jaewon's food bank. She would reach out to him privately later, away from this spotlight and attention. A shadow fell across their table. Minji looked up to see Yoonhee standing there, her hands clasped in front of her. Her 2 remaining friends hovered a few steps behind, looking uncomfortable. The confident, mocking woman from earlier was gone. In her place stood someone who looked deeply embarrassed and uncertain. "Ms. Park," Yoonhee said, her voice much quieter than before. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Minji glanced at Jaewon, who raised his eyebrows but said nothing. She nodded at Yoonhee. Of course. Yoonhee's friend stayed back as she took an empty seat at the table. Up close, Minji could see the tension in her face, the careful makeup that couldn't hide her discomfort. For a long moment, Yoonhee seemed unable to find words. "I owe you an apology," she finally said, though the words came out stiff and rehearsed. "The things I said earlier, the comments I made, they were inappropriate." Minji waited, saying nothing. She had learned long ago that silence often revealed more than questions. "I didn't know who you were," Yoonhee continued. And there it was, the excuse Minji had expected. "If I had known about your contributions to the foundation, I would never have." "So you would have treated me better if you knew I had money?" Minji asked quietly. Her voice wasn't angry, just sad. "You would have been kind only if you knew I was important?" Yoonhee's face flushed. "No, I just meant, you meant that my value as a person depends on my bank account," Minji said. "That I only deserve respect if I'm wealthy. That someone in a simple dress taking photos of chandeliers is worth mocking, but someone who donated $80 million deserves courtesy." The truth of it hung in the air between them. Yoonhee opened her mouth, then closed it again. There was no good response because Minji was right. Yoonhee's apology wasn't about genuine remorse for treating another human being cruelly. It was about embarrassment at being caught, at looking bad in front of her social circle. "I'm sorry," Yoonhee said again, but it sounded hollow. "I should have been more gracious to everyone here tonight." "Yes," Minji agreed simply. "You should have. Not because I have money, but because I'm a person. Because everyone deserves basic kindness regardless of their clothes or their job or their social status." Yoonhee stood up quickly, clearly wanting to escape this conversation. "Well, thank you for coming tonight and for supporting the foundation. Your generosity is admirable." She walked away quickly, her friends following. Minji watched them go, feeling tired. The apology had been worse than no apology at all because it revealed that Yoonhee still didn't understand the real problem with her behavior. "You handled that well," Jaewon said quietly. "Better than she deserved." Minji sighed. "I just wish people would treat everyone with respect from the start." Why does it take money or status for someone to be seen as worthy of basic human decency? Because most people measure worth by the wrong things, Jaewon replied. But you're teaching them a different lesson tonight, whether they're ready to learn it or not. As the evening continued, Minji noticed a clear divide forming in the ballroom. Some people genuinely seemed to understand what her story represented. They kept their distance, offering respectful nods if they made eye contact but not pushing to network or connect. They had learned something real about assumptions and judgment, but others couldn't help themselves. They circled Minji's table like sharks, looking for opportunities to introduce themselves and establish connections. These were the people who saw her revelation not as a lesson in humility, but as a networking opportunity they had almost missed. A wealthy businessman approached, his smile wide and artificial. "Ms. Park, I'm Dong-hyun Lee. I own several tech companies in the city. I'd love to take you to lunch next week and discuss potential partnerships. With your capital and my business experience, we could—" "I'm not interested in business partnerships," Minji said politely but firmly. "My focus is on charitable work, not investments." Of course, the man said, not deterred at all. "But surely you have advisors handling your portfolio. I know some excellent people who could—" "I'm satisfied with my current arrangements," Minji interrupted. "But thank you for the offer." The man finally moved on, but 3 more people were already waiting to approach. They all wanted something, whether it was her money, her connections, or just the prestige of saying they knew the mysterious donor. None of them seemed to care about her as a person. Minji glanced at her watch. The event was scheduled to end in 30 minutes. She just needed to hold on a little longer, and then she could escape back to her normal life. Tae-sung returned to her table, and this time he brought several board members with him. Unlike the opportunists who had been approaching all evening, these people seemed genuinely grateful and respectful. "Miss Park," one board member said, an elderly woman with kind eyes, "I wanted to thank you personally. My granddaughter received one of your scholarships 3 years ago. She's in medical school now, studying to become a pediatrician. Your generosity changed her entire future." This, Minji thought, was why she gave. Not for recognition or networking opportunities, but for real stories like this. Real people whose lives were genuinely improved. "I'm so glad the scholarship helped her," Minji said warmly. "Please tell her I wish her well in her studies. We need more caring doctors in the world." Another board member, a middle-aged man, added, "The clinic we built in the South District serves my neighborhood. I see every day the difference it makes to families who couldn't afford medical care before. You've literally saved lives, Ms. Park." These testimonials meant more to Minji than all the applause and attention from earlier. This was the real impact of her giving, measured not in dollars but in changed lives and new opportunities. The evening finally drew to a close. Tae-sung made a final announcement, thanking everyone for attending and reminding them that donation cards were available at the exit for anyone who wanted to contribute. He specifically mentioned that Minji's story should inspire giving at any level, emphasizing that every donation mattered. Guests began to leave, collecting their coats and calling for their cars. Minji stood ready to make her escape. The event coordinator rushed over one last time. "Ms. Park, we have a VIP exit you can use. Your car can pick you up there away from the photographers." "I don't have a car," Minji said. "I took the subway here and I'll take it home." The coordinator looked shocked. "The subway? But surely you could call a car service or we could arrange—" "The subway is fine," Minji said firmly. "Thank you for a lovely evening." She made her way toward the main exit, carrying her crystal award. Other guests stared as she passed, still trying to reconcile the woman in the simple dress with the $80 million donor. Some whispered to each other, pointing discreetly. Near the exit, Minji passed Yoon-hee and her friends collecting their designer coats. Their eyes met briefly. Yoon-hee looked away quickly, unable to hold Minji's gaze. Her friends pretended to be absorbed in their phones. Minji thought about how the evening had started, with these same women mocking her for taking photos and questioning whether she belonged. Now they couldn't even look at her, crushed under the weight of their own cruelty and assumptions. She felt no triumph in their discomfort, just a deep sadness that it had taken a revelation about money to make them see their behavior as wrong. If she truly had been just a poor bookkeeper with nothing to her name, would their cruelty have been any more acceptable? Did a person's worth really depend on their bank balance? Outside, the cool night air was a relief after the stuffy ballroom. Photographers still waited, hoping to get pictures of important guests. They ignored Minji completely as she walked past, just as they had when she arrived. She was still invisible to them, still just an ordinary woman in a simple dress, and that was exactly how she preferred it. Minji walked the few blocks to the subway station, her heels clicking on the pavement. She passed expensive cars picking up other guests, drivers in uniforms opening doors for women in furs and men in tailored coats. No one looked at her twice. On the subway platform, she stood among other regular people heading home from their evening shifts or late dinners. A young mother with 2 sleepy children, an elderly man in a security guard uniform, a group of friends laughing about their night out. These were her people, the ones who lived real lives without pretense or performance. The subway arrived, and Minji found a seat by the window. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass, seeing the borrowed dress and the crystal award resting on her lap. In a few hours, she would return the dress to Subin and put the award in a closet somewhere. Tomorrow, she would wake up and go to her bookkeeping job at the community center. Just like always, nothing about her had actually changed tonight, despite what happened at the gala. She was still the same person who worked hard, lived simply, and believed in helping others. The revelation of her wealth didn't make her better or more valuable. It just meant other people finally saw what had always been true, that worth has nothing to do with appearances. The subway car rocked gently as it moved through the tunnels beneath the city. Minji watched the dark windows, her mind still processing the strange evening. The crystal award sat on her lap, heavy and cold through the thin fabric of her borrowed dress. A young woman sitting across from her smiled. "That's beautiful," she said, gesturing to the award. "Did you win something?" Minji looked down at the engraved crystal. "I attended a charity gala tonight. They gave this to donors." "That's wonderful," the woman said warmly. "It's nice when people help others. I wish I could afford to donate to charity, but I'm still paying off my student loans." "Any amount helps," Minji said gently. "Even small donations make a difference. And there are other ways to help too, volunteering, spreading awareness, supporting others in your community. Money isn't the only form of generosity." The woman nodded thoughtfully. "I never thought of it that way. Maybe I could volunteer somewhere on weekends." They rode together for a few more stops, talking about different organizations that needed volunteers. When the young woman got off at her station, she waved goodbye with a genuine smile. That brief conversation, Minji thought, was worth more than all the networking attempts at the gala. Minji arrived at her stop and climbed the stairs to street level. Her neighborhood was quiet at this hour, working-class families settling in for the night. She walked past the small grocery store where she bought her vegetables, the laundromat where she washed her clothes every Sunday, the corner restaurant where she sometimes treated herself to noodles on Friday evenings. This was her real life. Far from the crystal chandeliers and designer dresses, this was where she belonged and where she chose to stay, even though she could afford to live anywhere in the city. Her apartment building was old but well-maintained. She climbed 3 flights of stairs to her small 1-bedroom apartment. Inside, everything was simple but comfortable. A small couch from a secondhand store, a table where she ate her meals and worked on her laptop, bookshelves filled with books she had collected over the years. Minji set the crystal award on her bookshelf, where it looked out of place among her modest belongings. She changed out of the borrowed dress, hanging it carefully to return to Subin tomorrow. In her regular pajamas, she felt like herself again. She made a cup of tea and sat by her window, looking out at the quiet street below. Her phone buzzed with several text messages. Most were from people she barely knew, numbers she didn't recognize. Word had spread quickly about who she was, and now people wanted to connect, to meet, to discuss opportunities. She ignored most of them. But there was one message from Tae-sung at the Hope Foundation. "Thank you for tonight. 3 new major donors have already committed because of your story. You've inspired real change. I hope the evening wasn't too difficult for you." Minji smiled slightly and typed back, "I'm glad it helped the foundation. That makes it worthwhile." There was also a message from her daughter Seo-yeon, who was studying at university 2 hours away. "Mom, someone sent me a link to an article about the gala." "Is it true? Why didn't you tell me?" Minji called her daughter, and Seo-yeon answered on the first ring. "Mom, the article says you donated $80 million. Is that real? It's real, Minji confirmed. I've been supporting the Hope Foundation for years. You know how important charity work is to me. But Mom, $80 million. I had no idea you had that much money. You live in that tiny apartment and work at the community center. Why didn't you tell me? Because having money doesn't change who we are, Minji said gently. I wanted you to grow up understanding the value of hard work and simple living. I wanted you to appreciate what you have and to care about helping others. If I had raised you in a mansion with everything handed to you, would you be the kind, hard-working person you are today? Seo-yeon was quiet for a moment. I understand, she finally said. But Mom, you could have made your life so much easier. You could have stopped working, traveled the world, lived in luxury. I could have, Minji agreed. But I remember what it was like when you were sick and I couldn't afford your medical care. I remember the charity that saved us. Every dollar I spend on myself is a dollar that can't help a child who needs it. My happiness doesn't come from luxury, Seo-yeon. It comes from knowing I'm making a difference. You're amazing, Mom, Seo-yeon said, her voice thick with emotion. I'm so proud of you. They talked for another hour, about Seo-yeon's classes and friends, about the gala and what happened. Minji told her about Yoonhee's cruelty and the awkward apology, about the people who suddenly wanted to be her friend once they knew she had money. That must have been so hard, Seo-yeon said. How people treated you. It was educational, Minji replied. It reminded me why I keep my giving anonymous. People should be valued for who they are, not what they have. Tonight showed me that most people still don't understand that. After they hung up, Minji sat quietly with her tea, thinking about the evening. She thought about Yoonhee and her friends, about how they measured worth by appearances and bank accounts. She thought about the security guards who questioned her, the coordinator who wanted to move her to a better table, only after learning who she was. But she also thought about Jae-won and the other community workers at her table, who had welcomed her with kindness from the start. She thought about the board member whose granddaughter received a scholarship, about the man whose neighborhood clinic saved lives. She thought about the young woman on the subway who wanted to volunteer. Those people, Minji realized, were the reason she did this work. Not the wealthy donors seeking recognition or the opportunists looking for connections. The real people whose lives were touched by genuine generosity, who understood that helping others was its own reward. The next morning, Minji woke early as always. She made simple breakfast and dressed in her regular work clothes, comfortable pants and a plain blouse. She packed the borrowed dress carefully in a bag to return to Subin. At the community center, several co-workers were waiting for her, having read about the gala online. Subin rushed over, her eyes wide with excitement and confusion. Minji, the news articles say you're the anonymous donor. They say you gave $80 million to the Hope Foundation. It's true, Minji said calmly, setting the dress bag on Subin's desk. Thank you for lending me the dress. It was perfect, but why didn't you tell us? Another co-worker asked. We had no idea you had so much money. Because it doesn't matter, Minji said simply. I'm still the same person who comes to work every day and does bookkeeping. The money doesn't change who I am or what I do here. Her supervisor approached, looking uncomfortable. Minji, I don't understand. If you have that kind of wealth, why do you work here? You don't need this job. Minji smiled gently. I work here because I love this work. I love seeing the impact our programs have on families in this community. I love being part of something that helps people. Money doesn't buy that kind of satisfaction. Purpose does. Throughout the day, people treated her differently. Some were awkward, unsure how to act around someone they now knew was incredibly wealthy. Others bombarded her with questions about her business success and investment strategies. A few even suggested she should quit her job and enjoy her money. But Minji continued with her normal routine, balancing spreadsheets and filing paperwork, answering phone calls and helping with program logistics. By the end of the day, most of her co-workers had relaxed, realizing that she really was the same person she had always been. Over the following weeks, Minji's life gradually returned to normal. The news articles faded. The opportunists who tried to contact her gave up when she didn't respond. The Crystal Award sat on her bookshelf, mostly forgotten. She continued her quiet charitable work, supporting not just the Hope Foundation, but many smaller organizations. She met with Jae-won privately and arranged funding to expand his food bank's winter programs. She donated to scholarship funds and medical clinics, youth programs and community centers, always preferring to give anonymously when possible. One afternoon, several months after the gala, Minji was buying vegetables at her neighborhood grocery store when she overheard two women talking. "Did you read about that woman who donated $80 million? One asked. "The one who still works a regular job and lives in a small apartment?" "I did," the other replied. "It made me think. My husband and I have been saving to buy a bigger house, but maybe we should donate some of that money instead. We don't really need more space." "That's what I thought too," the first woman said. "If someone with millions chooses to live simply and give generously, maybe we should reconsider our own priorities." Minji smiled to herself as she selected fresh lettuce. This was exactly what Taesung had hoped for when he convinced her to accept public recognition. Not that she would gain status or attention, but that her story might inspire others to think differently about generosity and worth. She paid for her vegetables and walked home through her neighborhood, greeting familiar faces along the way. The elderly man who ran the corner store, the young mother who lived on her floor, the teenager who worked at the laundromat on weekends. These were her neighbors, her community. They didn't care about her bank account or her charitable donations. They cared that she was kind, that she helped when someone needed it, that she treated everyone with respect. That evening, Minji sat by her window again with her tea, watching the sun set over the city. Somewhere out there, children were receiving medical care because of her donations. Students were attending university on scholarships she funded. Families were eating meals from food banks she supported. She thought about Yoon-hee and wondered if the experience had taught her anything real about judging others. She thought about the young woman from the subway who said she wanted to volunteer. She thought about her daughter, Seo-yeon, who was learning that true wealth had nothing to do with money and everything to do with character and purpose. Minji's phone buzzed with a message from Taesung. "Our donations are up 40% since the gala. Your story continues to inspire people. Thank you for agreeing to be recognized even though I know it was uncomfortable for you." She replied simply, "As long as it helps the children, that's all that matters." And that was the truth. Minji had never needed recognition or awards, designer dresses or expensive jewelry, status or social connections. She needed only the knowledge that her life had meaning, that her work made a difference, that somewhere a child had opportunities they wouldn't have had otherwise. The Crystal Award still sat on her bookshelf, gathering dust among her well-loved books. Minji glanced at it occasionally but rarely thought about the gala anymore. That night was just a moment in time, a brief interruption in the quiet work she had been doing for years and would continue doing for years to come. Because real generosity, Minji believed, didn't need an audience. It didn't need applause or public recognition. It just needed a willing heart and a commitment to making the world a little better, one act of kindness at a time. And in her small apartment, living her simple life, working her modest job, Minji continued to do exactly that. Not because she wanted to be seen as special or important, but because helping others was simply who she was, with or without the money, with or without anyone knowing. That was enough. That had always been enough, and that would always be her measure of a life well lived. Minji smiled gently. "I work here because I love this work. I love seeing the impact our programs have on families in this community. I love being part of something that helps people. Money doesn't buy that kind of satisfaction. Purpose does." Throughout the day, people treated her differently. Some were awkward, unsure how to act around someone they now knew was incredibly wealthy. Others bombarded her with questions about her business success and investment strategies. A few even suggested she should quit her job and enjoy her money. But Minji continued with her normal routine, balancing spreadsheets and filing paperwork, answering phone calls and helping with program logistics. By the end of the day, most of her co-workers had relaxed, realizing that she really was the same person she had always been. Over the following weeks, Minji's life gradually returned to normal. The news articles faded. The opportunists who tried to contact her gave up when she didn't respond. The Crystal Award sat on her bookshelf, mostly forgotten. She continued her quiet charitable work, supporting not just the Hope Foundation, but many smaller organizations. She met with Jaewon privately and arranged funding to expand his food bank's winter programs. She donated to scholarship funds and medical clinics, youth programs and community centers, always preferring to give anonymously when possible. One afternoon, several months after the gala, Minji was buying vegetables at her neighborhood grocery store when she overheard two women talking. "Did you read about that woman who donated $80 million?" one asked. "The one who still works a regular job and lives in a small apartment?" "I did," the other replied. "It made me think. My husband and I have been saving to buy a bigger house, but maybe we should donate some of that money instead. We don't really need more space." "That's what I thought too," the first woman said. "If someone with millions chooses to live simply and give generously, maybe we should reconsider our own priorities." Minji smiled to herself as she selected fresh lettuce. This was exactly what Taesung had hoped for when he convinced her to accept public recognition. Not that she would gain status or attention, but that her story might inspire others to think differently about generosity and worth. She paid for her vegetables and walked home through her neighborhood, greeting familiar faces along the way. The elderly man who ran the corner store, the young mother who lived on her floor, the teenager who worked at the laundromat on weekends. These were her neighbors, her community. They didn't care about her bank account or her charitable donations. They cared that she was kind, that she helped when someone needed it, that she treated everyone with respect. That evening, Minji sat by her window again with her tea, watching the sun set over the city. Somewhere out there, children were receiving medical care because of her donations. Students were attending university on scholarships she funded. Families were eating meals from food banks she supported. She thought about Yoon-hee and wondered if the experience had taught her anything real about judging others. She thought about the young woman from the subway who said she wanted to volunteer. She thought about her daughter, Seo-yeon, who was learning that true wealth had nothing to do with money and everything to do with character and purpose. Minji's phone buzzed with a message from Taesung. "Our donations are up 40% since the gala. Your story continues to inspire people. Thank you for agreeing to be recognized even though I know it was uncomfortable for you." She replied simply, "As long as it helps the children, that's all that matters." And that was the truth. Minji had never needed recognition or awards, designer dresses or expensive jewelry, status or social connections. She needed only the knowledge that her life had meaning, that her work made a difference, that somewhere a child had opportunities they wouldn't have had otherwise. The Crystal Award still sat on her bookshelf, gathering dust among her well-loved books. Minji glanced at it occasionally but rarely thought about the gala anymore. That night was just a moment in time, a brief interruption in the quiet work she had been doing for years and would continue doing for years to come. Because real generosity, Minji believed, didn't need an audience. It didn't need applause or public recognition. It just needed a willing heart and a commitment to making the world a little better, one act of kindness at a time. And in her small apartment, living her simple life, working her modest job, Minji continued to do exactly that. Not because she wanted to be seen as special or important, but because helping others was simply who she was, with or without the money, with or without anyone knowing. That was enough. That had always been enough, and that would always be her measure of a life well lived.